Hey, welcome everybody. Look at this wonderful little panel. I mean, we can't call it a power panel, it's not a Friday, but Kyle Kulinski, Cenk Uygur, and Kasparian. Three people who I believe, it is fair to say, just ripped up Politicon.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Jinx, you can't talk the rest of the show now.
Oh, okay.
So I feel a little uncomfortable between Anna and Kyle because when they're on a panel together, it's utter destruction. And oh no, I'm on a panel with both of them. Okay, I won't oppose you guys. Okay, so obviously we had an interesting weekend and there were many debates. We didn't even get to catch up on your debate with Scotty Nell Hughes, which I want to in the post game.
Sure.
And I took on Tucker Carlson, but we're going to talk about those, and then Charlie Kirk and Hassan Piker, that turned into something interesting. Oops.
What do? I get dirty every single year.
All I know about Charlie Kirk is he lives his life like a capitalist.
I live my life as a capitalist every day, Cenk. Oh, it's the best moment.
Okay, we'll talk. So we're going to talk about it in the postgame a little bit, but also a little bit later in this program, I'm going to explain the four different debating styles of the four people that I've debated over the last set of years in Politicon: Dinesh D'Souza, Ann Coulter, Tucker Carlson, and Ben Shapiro. We'll talk about it in this show, and then we'll talk a little bit about what I would have said to Tucker Carlson if the debate had gone in a different direction. We'll do that in the post game. Interesting. I've got a whole bunch of notes I can share with you guys and just you guys. That's for the members, tyt.com/join to become a member. We got a lot of stories today. I'm excited about a lot of them, including the caravan one, which is a little bit later in the program, and the new tax cuts that Trump is promising. Those are two stories riddled with insanity of Trump and the Republicans. So, but there's plenty of insanity to go around. Kyle's going to do the first hour. Kyle, take it away.
That's right. Here we go. A lot of stuff to get to. So we have some important updates on Jamal Khashoggi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, although I mess it up every other day. He's, of course, the Saudi journalist killed by Saudi Arabia. We also have some loathsome responses to share with you, but first, let's go to The Hill. They report the following. An individual suspected of being part of the group of Saudis involved in the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi was reportedly seen around Istanbul wearing Khashoggi's clothes, a fake beard, and glasses on the day of the killing. CNN, citing a senior Turkish official, reported that the man in the video, identified as Mustafa al-Madani, was captured by surveillance cameras leaving the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on the day Khashoggi died there. He appears to be wearing the same clothes Khashoggi was seen wearing when he entered the consulate. Turkish investigators have said they have audio and other evidence that proves Khashoggi was killed and dismembered by a group of Saudis in the consulate. The Turkish official told CNN that al-Madani was used as a body double in the operation. So what we're looking at here is, and this really, really struck me, that it's so concerted and so organized and so planned that it really seems like a smoke-filled back room in a way. And I always try to avoid the smoke-filled back room conspiracies whenever possible, but this is one of those instances where you're like, the dude wore a fake beard. I mean, that is wild. So Trump is waffling on this, and he's saying, I would love it if MBS didn't do it. And he's basically, trying to play both sides and pretend like he's tough on crime, but at the same time trying to keep the U.S.-Saudi alliance intact. And yeah, it's just a mess.
So explain why it is that they would use the body double. Was it the Saudis' attempts to make it seem as though Khashoggi had left the consulate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. So two natural conclusions come out of that, right? One part is surprising though. So the natural conclusions are, if you bring a bone saw and an autopsy expert and a body double, it wasn't something that happened by accident.
Right.
Over. End of this. It's not even close. That's super obvious. If the bone saw for some insane reason did not convince you, because you watch Fox News or something, well, the body double's got to do it, doesn't it? I mean, who brings a body double to an accidental killing? I don't think that's a thing. So second conclusion, which actually haunts me in some ways more, is I don't think they could have possibly have known what Khashoggi was going to wear that day.
Exactly.
And so I believe that is Khashoggi's actual clothes.
Yeah.
I think they took it off of him before they killed him, because they obviously doesn't have blood on him. And remember, they likely chopped off his fingers while he was still alive. So likely they stripped him naked, tortured him, and it's all on audio apparently. So the Turkish government has that. They keep threatening to use it and release it. In fact, they say they're going to release it tomorrow. So we'll see. And so naked, tortured, parts of his body chopped off, and then killed, and then beheaded and dismembered. We believe, but we're not positive about the order. We don't know if they beheaded him to kill him. Anyone trying to say that this was not premeditated is an obvious liar.
Well, thankfully, the moral voice of our generation, Pat Robertson, has some thoughts on this for us. So let's take a look at that.
I'll say it now and I'll say it over and over again. We've got to cool the rhetoric. And what the president is trying to do is to give the Saudis an out, and calls for sanctions and calls for punitive action against the Saudis is ill-advised. And Wendy, I just don't think you've got $100 billion worth of arms sales, which is, that's one of those things. But more than that, we've got to have some Arab allies. We have to have it. We cannot alienate our biggest player in the Middle East, who's a bulwark against Iran.
But can we have somebody that's killing journalists that are U.S. residents is the question.
We've had so many people killed. I mean, we had CIA people killed in Lebanon. People have been taken hostage over the years. I know it's bad, but I mean, we've had all kinds of stuff. But you don't blow up an international alliance over one person. I mean, I'm sorry.
Oh, what a great Christian. I wonder what his thoughts are on reproductive rights, right? When it comes to zygotes, I'm sure he's very much concerned about, being pro-life. But when it comes to living, breathing human beings who happen to be journalists who get murdered, well, these things happen. What are you gonna do? I mean, there were some CIA people sometime in the past.
That's a great point, Anna, and I hadn't thought about it in that context. Imagine if the Saudis had committed an abortion on purpose. Would Pat Robertson see it completely differently? Wait a minute, I didn't know the Saudis were that terrible. They're killing what they would consider to be people before they're born. After they're born, dismembering them and beheading them is perfectly fine if you got an arms deal at stake. But before they're born, that's an outrage. Before they're an actual person, oh my God, we got to protect them. I don't know, but there actually is no bounds to Robertson's hypocrisy. So he might even say, oh, they did an abortion. What's one abortion when we got an arms deal? I mean, look, imagine if he applied that logic back in the day to the guy who started his religion. I mean, we got to deal with the Roman Empire. What's one guy compared to a gigantic deal we have with the biggest empire in the world? I mean, this one little guy from Nazareth, what does he matter?
I like how he ignores all of the parts of the Bible that are just pacifist, and this really shows that he puts political ideology above everything else. And it shows that he'll fall in line behind Donald Trump come hell or high water, because he actually views him kind of as his demigod more than he views the words of his own Lord and Savior. So I find it's just strange to me that you can have Christians who are really good people, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, who use the message of the Bible for all the right reasons. But then you could also get the polar opposite philosophy to the point where it's comical.
I don't even think Pat Robertson is trying to preach anything from the Bible anymore. I mean, after Trump got elected, you're right, he does see Trump as this God figure. In fact, he thinks that Donald Trump was chosen by God to be president. He has now become, another propaganda arm of the Trump administration, in addition to Fox News. So Jake, just to answer the question of whether or not he would be upset if the Saudis had forced an abortion, I don't think he would be upset, because I do think that politics go above anything else, including his so-called religious beliefs. But Pat Robertson actually doubled down after getting criticized for this, and he used the same talking point that Trump uses, which is, no, but you guys don't understand, the Saudi arms deal is important because of jobs. Okay, that is a lie. And I wanted to look into that claim and actually give you guys some of the numbers. So first off, how many jobs does the US defense industry employ? About 355,000. So Trump claims, oh no, this specific Saudi arms deal has led to 500,000 jobs.
Oh, come on.
I know, 500,000 jobs. But the funny thing is, in typical Trump fashion, he keeps changing the numbers to suit whatever point he's trying to make. So back in January of this year, when MBS was visiting in Washington, Trump had claimed that this Saudi arms deal was going to provide about 40,000 new jobs. Fast forward to today with this whole Khashoggi controversy, all of a sudden, just to justify selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, he's now saying 500,000. There have been some cases where he's said 600,000. So how many jobs is it? It's certainly not 600,000, not 500,000. And again, just to emphasize or re-emphasize, the US defense industry employs 355,500 jobs.
For the entire industry.
Exactly.
And by the way, he said on now dozens of occasions, it's a $100 billion deal, it's a $110 billion deal, it's $14.5 billion. I mean, you could say $14.5 billion, that's still a lot of money, right? No, but he's got to embellish. He has to embellish on the numbers, on the jobs, and the amount of money that would come in. And the Pat Robertsons of the world, of course, unquestioningly have his back. I was also amused that they had prosperity gospel preacher Paula White on in a different situation in Pat Robertson's channel, talking about how, well, if you look at the Bible, it appears that Jesus is an immigrant, but he's not. He's not. He never broke any of the laws, okay? And did he have documents? I'm pretty sure he was undocumented, right?
He's also brown, by the way, which, I don't think they're very comfortable with that fact.
Right.
If he existed at all, I should say, he's brown.
Yeah.
That's the region of the world he's from.
That's right. They twist everything to try to fit their political agenda, and their political agenda has nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Now, speaking of political agenda, I have one more video for you. I think you're gonna like this. Rush Limbaugh also weighed in on this. Take a look.
I continue to get emails about the so-called Washington Post journalist, Jamal Khashoggi. My question is a really rather simple one. Where was this concern for our ambassador and 3 other men brutally murdered in Benghazi? And Hillary Clinton's reaction, what difference does it make now? She said in frustration. Does anybody see a disparity here in proportion?
Where was this concern? Everywhere. I don't know about you guys, but I saw Benghazi absolutely everywhere. And it's weird because he's saying this in service of the point, okay, let's ignore the Khashoggi thing because let's not go after Donald Trump.
Yeah, so we had about 28 hearings on Benghazi, so that's one of your answers. Second of all, there was no arms deal or other relationship we had to the people who did the killings in Benghazi. If there was, we all would have been massively in favor of cutting off that arms deal. Exactly. They killed our ambassador, they killed 3 other people, that's terrible. Does anybody think we had a relationship with those guys? No, the made up charges the Republicans said at the time is that somehow the Democrats should have known about the attack and the terrorist intentions ahead of time, and then afterwards should have said other words about it. But no one claims that we had a secret deal with the people who did the killings. In this case, we have a giant deal that Donald Trump won't shut up about with the guys who did the killings. That's a massive difference. Of course, you have to assume if you're Rush Limbaugh that your audience is not that bright, so you'll be able to skate that by them, including the incredibly obnoxious beginning to that so-called Washington Post journalist. What's the so-called part of it? He wrote for the Washington Post. He was a columnist for them for a year. No, you just want to smear the guy in every imaginable way.
And I honestly don't care who or what he was anyway.
Exactly.
He was dismembered by the Saudi government, which seems to be the big point there.
So and now finally, let's go to that issue, right? So these same guys, Pat Robertson, Rush Limbaugh, Donald Trump, are the ones who told you the Muslims are the problem. We got to keep him out of the country until we figure out what the hell is going on.
That's a good point.
And I mean, Rush Limbaugh, how many segments did he do about the evil Muslims? Now, I would add fundamentalist Muslims, but that's a distinction we make. That's not even a distinction Rush Limbaugh or Pat Robertson makes, or Donald Trump. But I mean, if you want to talk about evil fundamentalist Muslims, it doesn't get any more so than the Saudi leadership. And so not only was that the case before this killing, but now Pat Robertson and Rush Limbaugh are defending the most extremist Islamic fundamentalist that just beheaded and dismembered someone. Get a load of that twist in logic. And a lot of their followers are like, well, of course we're pro-Muslim beheadings. Haven't we said that all along?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. And I think that this whole story further proves that the right wing only uses Muslims for the sole purpose of fear-mongering, that they themselves know that the general Muslim population doesn't really serve as a threat to the United States, doesn't serve as a national security threat to the United States. What they do is exploit people's fear to win elections, to spread propaganda, to pass anti-immigration legislation or at least anti-immigration initiatives. And so if they were really concerned about the damage that Muslims would do, they would be outraged by this. But at the end of the day, it's all about the money, it's all about protecting political interests, it's all about covering up for Trump, helping Trump cover up for the Saudis. I mean, it's a really disgusting story, especially when you consider the precedent it sets for journalists, period. I mean, this says, hey, if you're a journalist, the US government will not look out for you and will not try to get justice on your behalf if you get murdered by Saudi royals or any other government, especially if there's a financial interest to keep those ties.
Yeah, it's any government that we profit off of.
Right.
And in the case of Donald Trump, he actually has made this clear on several occasions, to your point about Muslims in general. He said, oh, the Saudis, why would I be opposed to the Saudis? They pay me $40 to $50 million per apartment. Of course I'm not gonna be opposed to the Saudis. He literally said that. And if you don't know this, not only the Saudis switch, as soon as Donald Trump won the presidency, switch all their hotel rooms from other hotels, all to Trump properties. I mean, this bribery is not veiled very much. I know the Saudis are into veiling, but apparently not that. But in some cases, they literally took out hotel rooms, giant blocks of hotel rooms in Trump hotels and never went. They're just bribes. It's bribes out in the open. And Trump says, why would I be opposed to the Saudis? They keep paying me. Of course I'm not opposed to the Saudis. Oh, it's non-rich Muslims that I'd like to fearmonger about, while I actually have the worst of fundamentalist Muslims that pay me money, so I like them. In fact, in this case, he said, nobody's told me he's responsible, referring to the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, or as I'm calling him now, Bonso Salman. He said, nobody's told me he's not responsible. We haven't reached that point. I would love if he wasn't responsible.
Yep.
I would love if he wasn't responsible. Now, finally, the thing that they're a little agitated about is that the Saudis bungled lying so badly that it's hard to cover up for them. They're dying to cover up for them, but they made it really hard. One, to the question I raised originally, if you had the body double, why didn't you use it as an alibi? Like, I don't know why they did the body double, and then they didn't use it. Maybe they got just, they're like, oh yeah, as soon as it happened, they're like, oh, that was a really bad idea. He's got an obviously fake beard. They immediately identified who he is, right? So I guess scrap that plan. And in the beginning, of course, they said, no, he walked out alive. And the Saudi officials said that, saying, no, we know for sure he walked out alive. Now, when they asked Donald Trump, even he had a tough time justifying that. He had to tell the Washington Post, yeah, that one was inconsistent.
You know why they bungled it and why they didn't use the body double? Because the Turks were eavesdropping on the whole situation. Like, they had bugged the room, and they have, based on what we know, and I am taking it at face value, they say they have the audio recordings of the whole, murder, basically.
And other evidence.
And other evidence.
And they're gonna release it tomorrow.
So if I were, with the Saudis, if I were Saudi royalty and I knew all about all this, I wouldn't go to the body double, because the body double doesn't matter. It's clear that it's a body double if the Turks have the evidence that they say they have.
Yeah. Now we know not only do they not care about the genocide happening in Yemen with our weapons, they also don't care about dead journalists.
Exactly.
Okay. So now let's jump to something that's quite different, but I think also very interesting. Mitch McConnell was recently confronted in a restaurant with his wife by some angry protesters. So this happened at a popular Cuban restaurant in Louisville, Kentucky. Take a look.
Oh, yeah? Why don't you get out of here? Why don't you leave the entire country?
I'm gonna sell it to TMZ. He threw their leftovers at them? I didn't know that.
So they also, I don't think you saw it there, but somebody also went on to throw out his food, and there were multiple people who came up and basically yelled at him. And I'm curious what you guys think about this, because I have to say, I have very mixed feelings, and I feel like on all these similar stories, I have very mixed feelings. So recently happened with Ted Cruz, where Ted Cruz was in a restaurant with his wife, and you had the protesters basically shout him down and shout him out of the restaurant. Now, on the one hand, I think it's definitely fair to say that the people who are doing the shouting, I mean, that is literally free speech. Like, you're allowed to go up to somebody and scream at them. Obviously, you shouldn't do any physical assault. That's illegal. That should be illegal. I think we all agree to that. But I don't know, because I feel like, what if in these situations, it actually works in the sense that it makes their voting records 5% less terrible. And that can make a real difference in people's lives. Now, on the flip side, let's not pretend that this doesn't make people look kind of unhinged, especially if somebody's watching this and they don't happen to know how terrible of a person and a politician Mitch McConnell is. I feel like a casual viewer could look at this and be like, well, obviously the left is so unhinged and dumb and wrong, and this is not how we should be, fighting back. So I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think. I've always had mixed feelings on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, let me just preface this by saying that I will always disagree with anything that gets physical, including throwing his leftovers out on the sidewalk. That's unacceptable. Don't touch him, don't touch his food, don't touch his property. That's when you lose me 100%. Now, with that said, I've asked myself several times how I would feel if people were shouting at me based on my political opinions. And if I would feel comfortable advocating for someone, yelling at Mitch McConnell or Trump or any of the other goons, like, would I feel comfortable with them doing that to these elected officials if I'm not comfortable with someone shouting at me based on my political views? But we were just at Politicon. Had plenty of people shouting at me based on my political views.
All of us, a little bit of that.
All of us, exactly. And here's the thing, it is free speech, and they're allowed to do that. And I believe that as Americans, we should be allowed to voice our concerns toward these elected officials. And so I have no problem with someone raising their voice at a Mitch McConnell or any politician if they believe that this politician has done something divisive, has done something that has actually ruined the lives of certain Americans, whatever it is. You have a protection, a constitutional protection to be able to do that. And if you can't handle it, maybe it's time to rethink your political ideology.
Do you think it's effective though? Because that's one of the core things that I'm stuck on is I don't know if it's effective or if maybe it might even make it worse. I don't know.
Yeah, so you're gonna be shocked to find out strong opinions about this. But it's nuanced and there's different lines in different places. So first of all, I agree and I'm amused that the right wing who claim to be free speech absolutists will then turn around and say, a mob. It's a mob. I can't believe they're speaking freely. Let's note that irony and move forward. So in terms of what the ground rules should be, if we're making ground rules, one is I'm with Anna on yelling is okay from time to time. I'm going to explain what I think are the important caveats. But that happens to me all the time, not just at Politicon, but I'll be walking down the street in New York or I'll be at an airport and some guy will yell at the top of his lungs, all right? And if you want to like scream obscenities in the middle of an airport, that's on you, brother, okay? And it doesn't bother me at all. I'm actually slightly amused by it. So I think that's okay, and I think for a politician it's even more okay. But, so where are the lines? First of all, I think everyone should agree to Anna's lines. Nothing physical ever. So to me, two places where this guy is clearly out of bounds, and this is the second guy. There was actually an earlier protester as well. I'll tell you about him in a sec, or her. This guy went out of bounds by banging his fist on their table, and I think that crosses the line.
Agreed.
And later they had to-go food, leftovers, that they were going to take home, and he grabbed it and threw it on the sidewalk. No, don't touch their stuff, okay? And value leftovers. Okay, I know I do. Okay, so, and then the third part of it, I think, or second, depending on how we're counting, is there has to be some time limit to it, okay? If you're stalking someone and you keep following them, then it gets concerning, right? So, and for me, and now some people will disagree with this, don't go to their house. I think that that's really dangerous. I think it's a bad idea. There's plenty of unhinged people, mainly on the right, but there could be some on the left. And I don't want anybody at anybody's houses. Okay, that's crazy. If you ask me, I think that's crazy talk. Okay, so in terms of the time period, look, I remember Alex Jones at an airport stalked Bernie Sanders for about 20 minutes. Okay, you made your point, Alex, but as usual, you're unhinged. And then we start to worry about his security because you won't leave him alone. Somebody who stalked me at Politicon, and it was a bounds of reason, waiting for hours and hours. What are you gonna do? Why, so if you're following Mitch McConnell or Elizabeth Warren, I mean, you always gotta think shoe on the other foot, right? If you said something to Elizabeth Warren at an airport, I got no problems with that. You follow her around for 15 minutes, that's an issue, okay? That's my take on it, and I know that there's sometimes it could be a little bit of a vague line, but we got to keep things under control and cannot let them be physical. On the other hand, real quick, and I've said this before, the reason we're having this situation is because of money in politics. And you might think like, what are you talking about? Mitch McConnell will not talk to, he's in his home state of Kentucky. He will not talk to any constituent from Kentucky unless they have a big fat check for him. And so when you create a situation where you cannot reach your own representatives unless you're willing to bribe them, well, at some point, the dam's gonna burst. And you're gonna be having some nice Cuban food, and a woman and a guy in 2 separate occasions are gonna come up and yell at you because you've left them no recourse. And that is particular to politicians.
Yeah, here's why I think this is a really tough issue. I just want to give people who might not know some more information on Mitch McConnell so they understand. Because that anger, even though it might look at face value irrational almost, is actually, I think, perfectly rational. Because Mitch McConnell is a guy who, for example, he was for a constitutional ban on gay marriage. He supported every outsourcing deal, including NAFTA and GATT. He voted no on bringing cheaper drugs into this country. He supported repealing Obamacare, cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. He voted yes on warrantless NSA spying with the Patriot Act. He supports Guantanamo Bay and torture. He voted to eliminate the estate tax.
Come on,
well, hold on. One more.
You've lost me,
One
Jake.
more. So he supported the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. But here's my ultimate conclusion and why this will always be a tough issue for me is that to look at the 2 most extreme examples that I could come up with. So if I see somebody yelling at Dick Cheney in an airport, screaming about the Iraq War and the fact he has blood on his hands and he ordered torture and all that stuff, yes, part of me is gonna go get him, absolutely. He's such a terrible guy. But then again, we have to argue based on principles as well. And if I saw somebody who was yelling at Bernie Sanders in an airport, I'd be like, oh, why are you doing that? Right. So I think I'm always gonna waffle on this issue. I think it's a tough issue.
Yeah, well, I think everybody agrees that it's a tough issue. Well, of course, some see the world as completely black and white on both sides. But so I want to tell you about the earlier woman. And so the one person recorded the second guy that you all just saw there. And they were clearly the most honest person in the room because they said, I'm gonna sell this to TMZ. And then you saw the giant TMZ sign on the video. So apparently delivered on that promise. Okay, but Todd Bird and Casey Leak, they're partners. And they were at the diner as well. It's just great to see a married couple in Kentucky that are 2 guys. And they're like, oh, that's Mitch McConnell. And then, but they were a little, I got the sense from that, I don't want to put too many words in their mouth, that a little disconcerted at the volume, right? Which goes to Kyle's point, if you're losing the gay couple next door with your screaming, then you got to calibrate to see if that's the right way to approach the issue. Although your anger is incredibly justifiable based on the list that Kyle read, and that list could go on and on.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, the first woman was also screaming apparently at the top of her lungs, and I like what she said though. She said, "You're a traitor to this country," she said to Mitch McConnell, and over told him how he was ruining the country. And then after she left, she went up to the window and gave him a double middle finger. Now, and then the next guy, again, went a little out of bounds, to say the least, on the banging of the fist on the table, etc. And in that video, it looks like the crowd is mainly telling him not to do it. According to witnesses, it was mixed. Some were saying, hey, cut that out. And some were saying, we're applauding when both of them yelled at Mitch McConnell. So another interesting note in that is that they're beginning to lose Kentucky.
That is an interesting point. One other thing that I just want to bring up and quickly mention, I hate when people start to nitpick political activism and, more importantly, protest, right? Because the whole point of protest is not meant to be based on the framing or the terms of the person who's being protested. Protests are not meant to be convenient. By definition, protests are supposed to make these politicians or elected officials feel uncomfortable. And so and again, look, I think that there are some ground rules that do make sense. You don't want to get physical. You don't want to do anything that could be considered assault. I agree with you on the stalking thing, although I think 15 minutes isn't really that long. But I don't want to start nitpicking people who have been so frustrated at a political system that hasn't worked for them and elected officials who haven't looked out for them. I don't want to nitpick them and tell them they're wrong when they finally get an opportunity to voice their concerns.
Yeah, look, the First Amendment is meant to protect offensive speech. Yeah, you don't have to bother protecting perfectly pleasant speech.
Exactly.
No one's against that. And it's actually a point that the right wing makes often when they want to say things that are racist, bigoted, etc. And they say, well, hey, that's what the First Amendment protects. Yeah. Okay, that's fair, but the First Amendment clearly protects this as well. I mean, it protects it in two parts, not just in freedom of speech, but also being able to seek a redress of your grievances from the government. That's the Senate Majority Leader. It doesn't get any more government than Mitch McConnell. And by the way, his dining partner, his wife, is Elaine Chao, the transportation secretary. So you could not find a more government table in the whole country than that table if you wanted to get to cite your grievances. And that is what they did. And in a sense, that's the most constitutional thing you could possibly do.
Yeah, democracy is messy, and that's democracy. We just saw democracy.
Yeah. So, and super last thing on this, look, whatever you think of the bounds and the rules that we just stated and whether you agree or disagree with them, one thing I think we can agree to is that the right wing talking point that when they say racist stuff, it's awesome free speech. But when the left wing says something, it's a mob, is absolutely preposterous.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, we got to take a quick break.
That's right.
So let's do that. And then when we come back, tax cuts?
Yes, Trump's so-called middle-class tax cuts or something.
Yeah, I got a lot of numbers for you guys. When we come back, fun numbers. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. There's a lot of great comments here. I'm going to try to do them as quickly as I can. I'm going to go one from Twitter first. Dr. Pepper O'Doom writes, if the Saudi government had dismembered Rush Limbaugh, for examul, I guarantee Pat Robertson and the rest of the right wing would be singing a different tune.
Would they?
No, I think that's a great point because they don't know Khashoggi. The guys at the Washington Post know Khashoggi, and even their conservative head of their editorial board is like all animated about this, incredibly animated for understandable reasons, and they know him, right? And a lot of the elite knew Khashoggi, and that's part of the reason why it's such a big story. But Pat Robertson, Rush Limbaugh, those guys don't know him. But if they killed and dismembered Rush Limbaugh, would we all have a different reaction? I mean, certainly the right wing would, right?
And by the way, like just to be 100% upfront about how I personally would react to that happening to Rush Limbaugh, I hate Rush Limbaugh, but I would have the exact same reaction that I'm having right now with Khashoggi because you cannot warrant that type of abuse of power, that type of criminality, that type of murder, period.
Yeah, no, of course. And my point is, though, unfortunately, the more famous the person is, the bigger a deal it is, right? Yeah. You can kill any kid in Yemen, it doesn't matter at all.
100%, that's what I was gonna say. There's a literal genocide going on in Yemen, and there's barely a peep about it happening. And then a journalist, it took a journalist to get us to outrage.
So I looked into that because I was curious why it is that people latch on to the death of one person versus mass genocide, things like that. And there's actually a psychological phrase for it, and there's a body of research that looks into it. It's called psychic numbing. Talked about it on No Filter, you should check it out. But yeah, psychic numbing is basically your brain can't really wrap itself around the sheer numbers in a genocide. But it's different when it comes to one specific person.
But and so in this case, it's one specific person and somebody that some of the elite knew. But the more famous you get, the more outrageous it appears. If they chopped up Anderson Cooper, and I feel bad using any of these specific examples, but if they'd done to Anderson Cooper, we might go to war with Saudi Arabia, right? Because, oh, wait a minute, I know Anderson Cooper, that's outrageous, right? So anyway, a lot more comments, so I'm gonna try to do this as quickly as I can. Joyanne1960 says, we've been brainwashed to treat politicians with kid gloves, and the only way we're allowed to voice our opinion is on election day. It's wrong, these people have our lives in their hands. They have no business acting like they're in a bubble of protection. Now I'm going to Justin. Remember when we were all confused why Nikki Haley resigned, quote, out of nowhere, days after Khashoggi was killed, but just before the story broke, no such thing as coincidences.
That's a good point.
I don't know.
So they think that she cares deeply about that?
No, she just might not want to be in the middle of a mess.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
But I have no idea.
Because I was going to say she definitely doesn't care about that.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable saying that.
I agree.
Dr. Chaos MD says if we let the murder of a journalist stop a weapons deal with the Saudis, then we allow the death of one man to get in the way of deaths of countless men, women, and children in Yemen, and who knows where else, and Pat Robertson can't abide that. That's such a great point too. Like, wait, we can't let one guy's death stop all the other deaths that we're sanctioning. Wow, what a humanitarian he is. And finally, Turkosaurus Rex writes in, this is all in the member section. Why isn't anyone asking the Saudis to turn over Khashoggi's body? After all, if he was accidentally killed in a fist fight, there's no reason his body should have been dismembered and dissolved in acid, right? Another great point, our members are geniuses. Where's the body? If there was an accidental fist fight, the body should be intact and you guys should have it.
That's like, well, how many stories have there been so far from Saudi Arabia? Like 4? They just keep changing the story.
Yeah.
Man, I wish like that we could get that into the mainstream press and have people ask that question. That's such a great question.
I have a really quick dumb question. So that acid dissolving the body, is that real? I thought that was a made up thing.
I saw it on Breaking Bad, so it's definitely real.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like that's where I saw it, and I'm like, this is just a Breaking Bad thing, but maybe it's a thing.
No, it's either real or it turns you into the Joker. Okay. Anyway, tyt.com/join to be one of the geniuses who comment here and that we read and add to the show. tyt.com/join. All right, what's next?
Okay. So President Trump is promising a middle-class tax cut. He did this after a rally in Nevada. The Washington Post says the following. After his campaign rally in this northeastern Nevada town, Trump talked up the new round of tax cuts, but did not go into specifics. He said the cuts would be done sometime just prior, I would say, to November. We are going to be putting in and are studying very deeply right now, around the clock, a major tax cut for middle-income people. Trump said shortly before his departure back to Washington, not for business at all, for middle-income people. This despite the fact that Congress is out of session until after the November 6th midterm elections. So basically what that means is Donald Trump just, casually was talking about, oh yeah, definitely gonna do another tax cut before November. But Congress is out, so that's impossible. You can't do that. So in other words, he just made it up and he's caught red-handed, but that won't change any of his rabid supporters from still saying he's right somehow, even though that makes no sense.
Trump, this is the second time he said that he was gonna do things that he can't really do without Congress. Things that he said he would accomplish prior to the midterm elections. The other thing, which we'll talk about later in the show, has to do with foreign aid to Honduras and Guatemala. He says he's gonna cut off aid to those countries because of this whole caravan situation, caravan of migrants trying to cross over into the United States. I think, especially when it comes to this tax proposal that he's randomly and casually making, he realizes that the tax law that they did pass is extremely unpopular. It's very clear that they were really just tax cuts for the wealthy, tax cuts for corporations, and the middle class hasn't really benefited from it. So much so that GOP candidates have now abandoned bragging about those tax cuts while they campaign because they realize how incredibly unpopular it is. So I think Trump is just trying to garner some support by saying, no, don't worry guys, I got you. I'm gonna cut your taxes before the midterms. I don't know how he plans on doing that. But one other thing that I do want to mention is if you look at polling, the majority of Americans, including a slight majority with Republicans, would agree to increasing their taxes to get universal health care.
Yeah.
So I think he's wrong in thinking that all Americans really want is more tax cuts.
So I have a really interesting fact about that. Apparently 61% of Americans say that his tax bill was for the rich and corporations. So honestly, it doesn't matter. They've been trying to brand this from day one, and they keep pounding the pavement and saying, oh no, this is a tax cut for regular people. This isn't a tax cut for the rich. It's not working. Even though they're repeating it over and over and over and over, it's not working. And in fact, the tax bill that already passed, it raises taxes on everybody that makes $75,000 a year or less over a decade. So it's not working because we see what's happening. Wages are falling. Unemployment is going down. So he likes to tout that over and over like, oh, unemployment's low. But wages are falling too. So talking about unemployment is not the best economic indicator.
So many things to say. First, on that poll, there's two other fun facts about it. So the margin, what was the margin? Okay, 61%. But what percentage thought, no, it's also for the middle class? Only 30. So it's 61 to 30. That's a 2-to-1 margin. That's an absolute disaster. But wait a minute, fake news. Who did the poll? Was it one of those media organizations? It was the Republican National Committee. Oops. Okay, that is why all the Republicans stopped running ads on the tax breaks, because they were killing themselves. So the memo went out to all Republicans: stop the ads on the tax cuts, because all it's doing is costing you the election. It's deeply unpopular. Now, let's go to point number 2, which is Donald Trump being such a knucklehead. Number 1, as Kyle pointed out, Congress is not in session. What he's suggesting is an impossibility, and normally it takes 7 weeks. It took 7 weeks last time to pass a bill. There's only 11 days left in November. There's only 2 weeks left before the election. Obviously impossible. Okay, but number 2, look at what he admitted. He said, this time, not for business at all, for middle income people. Thereby admitting last time it was for business and not for middle income 100%. People.
So dumb.
I mean, why do you say that? You're such an idiot. Okay, I'm glad he's stupid because it helps our cause, because he accidentally reveals who he is. I mean, when I asked Tucker Carlson about his pathological lies during our debate on Politicon last night, Tucker Carlson said basically, well, he is who he is. Well, that means basically he's not that bright, and he doesn't know that he's not supposed to say, hey, last time it was for businesses. And of course, the implicit part of that is the businesses that helped me. Okay, and that he's raised over $100 million already for his non-existent 2020 election. Okay, all from those same business interests. The middle class was just an afterthought for them. So I got numbers on how bad it is in a second. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment. Before Tucker made that point about Trump lying, he did laugh maniacally, which was very convincing. You know, it made a really great point there.
And let me also say real quick, I actually would support middle-class tax cuts, but the reality is they don't want middle-class tax cuts. They say it's middle-class tax cuts, and then they cut it for the rich. And to give a few examples of that, in the original bill, the corporate tax rate went from 35% to 21%, and they raised the line for the estate tax up to $10 million. So it was only applying to the 0.01%, and they said, why not make that the 0.0001%?
Yeah, and then my favorite was in one of, I think it was Kevin Brady, but it might have been another Republican politician who said, no, the estate tax is not necessarily for the rich.
What?
No, but it literally applies to people who have estates over $5 million.
That's why they call it the death tax, because they're trying to spin the PR machine to get people to think, oh my God, that's gonna affect me because I'm gonna die.
I don't know if it's just like as usual, a brazen lie, or if they really think like, oh, I mean, $5 million in my club is middle class. Right?
Yeah.
So now let me give you numbers on how much people save, okay? So in tax cut 1.0, the one that already passed, if you're in the top 1%, and there's different numbers for that, $730,000 a year or $837,000 a year, in that ballpark, you're gonna save $61,090, okay? And then in 2027, what little, or 2025 in realistically, what little tax cuts the middle class did get wiped out.
Yep.
But for the rich,
permanent.
75% get to keep their tax cuts forever. So now wait, you say for budgetary reasons, they say we had to they call it sunsetting. We had to sunset the tax cuts for the middle class. Well, then why didn't you have to sunset the taxes for the rich? I mean, that costs us even more money. Oh, but no, those are our donors and our friends. Of course, we're not going to end those. So now they're coming back around and saying, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, we meant the middle class too. right? And now that it's unpopular, we're about to lose the election, we also meant the middle class. Okay, so great analysis to find out, okay, tax cuts 2.0, this is already passed by the House. Okay, so Senate's not gonna come back and pass it. The Republicans in the House all voted for this, or almost all did. If you make under $28,600, so poor to middle class, you're gonna get about $100. So it's in the middle class tax cuts, you would actually get $100 if you make under that amount.
$100 for the full year?
For the whole year, $100.
Wow,
okay?
all right.
And it's actually worse than that because I remember there was a great article in The Intercept right after Trump was elected. In his first week in office, he got rid of a middle class mortgage tax deduction, which effectively raised taxes on the middle class.
Yes.
So they never meant it about you. Ever, 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 ever. Don't let them get away with the lies. And by the way, this is why the mainstream media is so objectively terrible and why you have to come to new media to get the truth, because they won't tell you that. They'll give you the both sides tap dance and they'll say, well, the Republicans say they're cutting it for the middle class, but they're not actually doing that. So, report, do your job.
And here, look, I'll give you the real numbers. In the new tax cuts, luckily, again, they have not been passed. And we might disagree a little bit on whether I am in favor of a tax cut for the middle class. If you make between $54,000 and $95,000, in the ones that are proposed, you would actually get a $980 tax cut. Now, I'm opposed to that because I think it's basically just bribery of real Americans. They say they're giving away stuff. It's Christmas, right? And this is what they accuse Democrats of all the time. Oh, Obama phones, and he's giving away stuff to minorities. This is a giveaway in another sort. It's just but it destroys the deficit, et cetera. That's my conservative fiscal side from back in the day. But $980 to be fair, okay? The top 1% would get another $40,180.
On top of the $61,000
That's
they're
right.
getting with tax cut 1.0.
So at the end of the day, if you're poor to middle class, you get about $100 combined from the two. You get about $1,000 if you're middle class, and if you're rich, you get $100,000. Okay, and then Trump says, "Oh, the new one's for the middle class." Then why are you giving $40,000 to the top 1% again in that proposal? So even that's not true. They can't help themselves. They love redistribution of wealth. They love to take it from you and give it to the top 1%. Okay, we got to take another break. When we come back, my summary of the different debating styles and substance of the four people I've debated in the last 4 years at Politicon, Ann Coulter, Ben Shapiro, Dinesh D'Souza, and Tucker Carlson, and then how I responded to them. So it's an interesting conversation. We'll do that when we return.